As the George Floyd protests spread across the United States, U.S. President Donald Trump has now threatened military action to curb the violent protests raging across the nation as of now. Now, before we tell you more, listen in.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
That was the U.S. President's first address since the protests broke out in the country, declaring himself as the president of law and order. Trump used it to threaten military action in states which refused to take any action against the protesters. But the president did not just stop at that. He called the rioters domestic terrorists. And he even asked every governor of every state to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers to countermeasure.
Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled.
But this is not the first time that Trump asked governors to take strict action. In a heated phone call that was leaked, the president asked governors to dominate, bashing what he called a weak response to the protests in the state.
Get a lot of men. We have all the men and women that you need. But people aren't calling them up. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time.
But even with the U.S. president's call for military action, America's governors are pushing back. In fact, New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo has called for a national ban on excessive force by police. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker also accused the U.S. president of making the situation worse. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden slammed Donald Trump on Monday for using the American military against the American people. And in a tweet, Biden even accused Trump of tear-gassing peaceful protesters for a photo opportunity. Police brutality is what protesters are condemning in the various protests across the United States. While some protests themselves have seen excessive use of force by the police officers, many of them have now come ahead in support of the demonstrators. Police officers were seen taking the knee in front of protesters in Washington, D.C. The officials joined the protesters as they stood outside Trump International Hotel. And a similar scene was witnessed in Portland earlier. Police officers had asked the protesters to stay off the streets. The protesters then asked the police officers to kneel in solidarity with their movement against racial injustice. And the police officers complied. This move was met with cheers and praise of gratitude from the demonstrators in Oregon's largest city. Protesters were even seen shaking hands with the officers as they kneeled.
This is what it's all about right here.
But it was not just these officers. Various police officials around the country were seen kneeling in silence to pay tribute to the memory of George Floyd.